In the depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that no species dares to speak aloud. They whisper it in their councils, debate it in their academies, and fear it in their darkest moments. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Confederation has maintained order through careful balance, technological superiority, and the unspoken agreement that some species are simply manageable. Humans were supposed to be one of them. When Earth's first crewed vessels limped into Confederation space 50 years ago, leaking radiation and held together by what appeared to be hope and stubbornness, the galaxy's elder races shared a collective sigh of relief. Here was another primitive species to guide, to civilize, to fit neatly into the established order. The humans seemed grateful for the technology, eager to learn, quick to adapt to Confederation protocols. They were supposed to stay grateful. They were supposed to remain manageable. But Commanders Extra of the Veltar hegemony had spent the last 6 months watching something that made her ancient blood run cold. She had observed these humans in ways her superiors never intended, studied them beyond the sanitized reports that crossed her desk. What she discovered challenged everything the Confederation believed about the nature of intelligence, survival, and the very fabric of galactic civilization. Now, as she stood in the observation deck of the research station orbiting the human colony world of New Geneva, watching a sight that should have been impossible, she realized that the galaxy's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating humanity's potential. It was believing they could control it. The question that burned her mind would soon shatter the foundation of everything the Confederation had built, and the answer would determine whether the galaxy was ready for what humanity truly represented. But first, she had to find the courage to ask it. The stellar cartography lab hummed with the soft blue glow of holographic displays, each one showing a different sector of human space. Commander Zoextara's 4 arms moved with practiced precision across the control interfaces, her scaled fingers dancing over quantum processors that could analyze the molecular composition of a planet from 3 star systems away. The Veltar had been masters of observation technology for over 2 millennia, and their equipment was considered the finest in the Confederation. It should have been more than adequate for monitoring a species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel. Should have been. The primary display flickered, and Zoextara felt her secondary hearts skip a beat as the image resolved. New Geneva sprawled below the orbital station like a living organism, its cities growing in patterns that defied conventional urban planning. Where other species built in orderly grids or aesthetically pleasing spirals, human settlements seemed to pulse outward in chaotic bursts, following no discernible logic that Confederation architects could understand. But that wasn't what had been keeping her awake for the past 6 months. "Computer, replay sequence 77 Alpha," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had served in the Confederation Defense Corps for over 3 centuries. The display shifted, showing the eastern continent of New Geneva as it had appeared 6 months ago. Rolling hills covered in the orange-leaf vegetation native to the world, a few scattered human outposts connected by thin roads that curved around natural obstacles rather than cutting through them. It was exactly what the Confederation's terraforming protocols would have predicted for a Class 7 agricultural world. Now overlay with current imagery. The scene transformed. Where there had been hills, massive industrial complexes now rose like geometric mountains. The scattered outposts had become sprawling cities connected by transportation networks that moved goods and people at speeds that should have required decades of infrastructure development. Most disturbing of all, the natural vegetation hadn't been cleared away. Instead, it had been integrated into the human constructions in ways that made the cities appear to have grown from the landscape itself. Zoextara's tertiary arm unconsciously traced the worry patterns her species used when confronted with the incomprehensible. According to every model the Confederation had developed over 3,000 years of galactic civilization, what she was seeing was impossible. No species could achieve this level of development in 6 months. The logistical requirements alone should have taken decades to organize, even with the most advanced Confederation assistance. The humans had done it without any assistance at all. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. The holographic display shimmered and resolved into the elongated features of Sub-Administrator Quenth, a Savari whose pale blue skin and oversized cranium marked him as one of the Confederation's bureaucratic elite. Commander Victor, Quinta's melodious voice carried the patronizing tone that most Confederation species used when addressing military personnel. I trust your monitoring duties continue to show the expected progression of human development? ZYXDRA's claws flexed involuntarily. The expected progression. She glanced at the data flowing across her secondary screens, numbers that told a story the sub-administrator clearly didn't want to hear. Sir, I believe there are some anomalies that require immediate attention from the Oversight Committee. Quinta's large eyes narrowed slightly. Anomalies? Commander, the human species has been thoroughly evaluated by our xenobiological and technological assessment teams. They represent a standard class for developing civilization with minor variations in their social structures. What anomalies could possibly require committee intervention? On a private display, invisible to the transmission, ZYXDRA pulled up the industrial output reports. In 6 months, human mining operations had extracted more rare earth elements from New Geneva than the Veltar had predicted was possible with the equipment the humans possessed. Their manufacturing capacity had increased by a factor of 12, and their energy production had grown exponentially despite no apparent new power source construction. Sir, their development rate exceeds all established models by significant factors. Their industrial output, population integration, and technological adaptation are occurring at rates that our scientists believe to be physically impossible. Quinta's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. A wariness that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. Commander, I'm sure you're aware that human psychology includes a tendency toward what they call thinking outside the box. Their development patterns may seem irregular, but they're well within the parameters of acceptable variance for a Class 4 species. Continue your observations and file your reports according to standard protocols. The transmission ended before ZYXDRA could respond. She stared at the blank display for several moments before turning back to her monitoring equipment. Standard protocols, the phrase that had governed Confederation policy for millennia, ensuring that every species developed according to predictable patterns, following established guidelines that maintain galactic stability. But the humans weren't following the patterns. ZYXDRA activated a secure channel and began downloading the restricted file she had been accumulating over the past months. Data that painted a picture so far outside standard protocols that she wasn't entirely certain her superiors would believe it. The humans hadn't just adapted Confederation technology. They had improved it. The fusion reactors they had been given were now producing energy outputs 30% higher than factory specifications. The medical equipment had been modified to treat conditions that the original designers had never encountered. Most disturbing of all, the faster-than-light communication arrays had been enhanced to carry data loads that should have burned out the quantum processors within hours. When Confederation engineers had asked the humans to explain their modifications, they had been met with apologetic smiles and explanations that boiled down to "we just thought this way might work better." As if casual improvement of technology that had taken the Confederation centuries to perfect was a natural human instinct. A new alert flashed across her console. Long-range sensors had detected something in the outer system that made her blood temperature drop several degrees. A human vessel was approaching New Geneva, but its energy signature was unlike anything in the Confederation databases. The ship's quantum displacement readings suggested a faster-than-light drive system that was at least 2 technological generations ahead of what the humans should have possessed. ZYXDRA enhanced the sensor array and began a detailed scan of the approaching vessel. What she found defied every assumption the Confederation had made about human capabilities. The ship wasn't just using advanced technology. It was using technology that the Confederation's most advanced species hadn't yet developed. Her hands moved quickly across the control surfaces, initiating a comprehensive analysis of the vessel's construction. The hull materials showed atomic structures she had never seen before, arranged in patterns that suggested manufacturing techniques beyond current galactic standards. The propulsion system generated quantum field manipulations that should have required computers the size of small moons to calculate. As she watched, the ship entered orbit around New Geneva and began transmitting identification codes that registered it as the civilian transport determination's edge, operated by something called the Human Exploratory Cooperative, a civilian transport. The humans were using technology that outclassed Confederation military vessels for civilian purposes. HFY began tracing the vessel's origin point, following its quantum wake back through space. The calculations took several minutes, and when they resolved, she felt her world shift on its axis. The ship had originated from a system that wasn't supposed to exist in human space. According to Confederation records, the Kepler 442 system contained nothing but gas giants and asteroid fields. No planets suitable for colonization, no resources worth extracting. But the quantum signature told a different story. The Determination's Edge had launched from a fully operational facility in that system, and the background radiation suggested industrial activity on a massive scale. The humans had built something in secret, something that the Confederation's monitoring networks had completely missed. For the first time in her 3-century career, HFY began to question everything she thought she knew about galactic civilization. The Confederation prided itself on its knowledge, its order, its ability to guide younger species along predetermined paths of development. But what if they had been wrong? What if humanity represented something that the established order had never encountered before? She pulled up the classified psychological profiles that the Confederation maintained on all member species. The human entries made for fascinating reading, full of observations about their apparent contradictions. They were described as simultaneously cooperative and individualistic, peaceful and violent, logical and emotional. The psychologists had struggled to fit humanity into the established categories that had served to classify thousands of other species. One notation caught her attention. Humans demonstrate an unusual tendency to thrive in situations that other species find overwhelming or impossible. This appears to be linked to what they term adaptive thinking, a psychological flexibility that allows them to find solutions outside established parameters. Adaptive thinking. The phrase echoed in her mind as she looked at the industrial complexes growing across New Geneva surface. Solutions outside established parameters. What if that wasn't just a psychological quirk? What if it was something more fundamental? A soft alert drew her attention to the communication array. The Determination's Edge was requesting permission to dock with the orbital station. Standard procedure would be to grant the request, conduct a routine inspection, and file a report noting the arrival of another human civilian vessel. But HFY had spent 6 months watching the impossible become routine. She had seen humans accomplish things that should have taken decades in a matter of months. She had observed technology that defied the basic assumptions of galactic civilization. Instead of following standard procedure, she activated the station's full sensor array and began the most comprehensive scan she had ever conducted on a civilian vessel. If the humans were hiding something, if they had capabilities that the Confederation didn't understand, she was going to find evidence. What she discovered in the next hour would change everything. The Determination's Edge wasn't just advanced. It was a quantum leap beyond anything in the Confederation databases. The ship's computer systems used principles that the galaxy's greatest minds were only beginning to theorize. Its manufacturing showed techniques that suggested an understanding of matter manipulation at the subatomic level that should have been impossible without equipment that could fill entire planets. But most disturbing of all was what the deep scans revealed about the ship's origin. The quantum signatures embedded in its hull told the story of its construction, and that story suggested that the humans had achieved something that no species in galactic history had ever managed. They had apparently solved the unified field equations that had puzzled Confederation scientists for 2 millennia. Not only solved them, but applied them to practical technology. HFY stared at the data flowing across her screens and felt the foundations of her understanding crumble. Everything the Confederation believed about the nature of technological development, about the progression of civilizations, about the very limits of what was possible, was being challenged by a species that had been in space for less than 50 years. The communications system chimed again. A human voice, warm and friendly, filled the observation chamber. Station control, this is Captain Sarah Chun aboard the Determination's Edge. We're carrying a diplomatic delegation from the Human Exploratory Cooperative and would like to request a meeting with your senior staff. We have some information that we believe will be of considerable interest to the Confederation. Thwaxthara found herself staring at the communication panel, her mind racing through possibilities. Information that would be of interest to the Confederation. What kind of information would humans think they could provide to a galactic civilization that had existed for thousands of years? Unless they had discovered something that the Confederation hadn't. Her claws moved across the control surface, opening a channel. Captain Chun, this is Commander Zyaxthara, Station Commander. Permission granted to dock. I'll arrange for you to meet with our senior diplomatic staff. As she closed the channel, Zyaxthara realized that she was about to face a decision that could reshape her understanding of everything. The humans were no longer the manageable, predictable species that the Confederation had believed them to be. They had become something else, something that challenged the very foundations of galactic order. The question was whether the Confederation was ready to accept that truth, or whether they would try to suppress it. Either way, Zyaxthara knew that the galaxy was about to change forever. The Great Assembly Chamber of the Confederation's Central Authority stretched across nearly 2 kilometers of artificial gravity-maintained space. Its crystalline walls designed to accommodate the visual, auditory, and atmospheric needs of the galaxy's most diverse collection of sentient species. Suspended in the center of the vast chamber was the consensus platform, where representatives from 378 member worlds gathered to make decisions that shaped the destiny of trillions of beings across the galaxy. Zyaxthara had never expected to stand on that platform herself. As she waited for the session to begin, she could feel the weight of thousands of eyes upon her from the galleries that rose in concentric circles around the central speaking area. Representatives from species she had only read about in xenobiology texts sat alongside familiar faces from the Confederation's core worlds, all of them drawn by the emergency session that had been called based on her report. Her report, the document that had taken her 3 sleepless days to write, as she struggled to find words that could convey the magnitude of what Captain Chun had revealed without sounding like the ravings of someone who had spent too long alone in deep space. The session bell chimed, a harmonic frequency designed to be audible across the full range of Confederation hearing capabilities. Chancellor Vector, the ancient Thurian who had led the Confederation for over a century, rose from his position at the center of the platform. His 6-meter height and ceremonial robes marked him as one of the galaxy's most respected diplomatic leaders, someone whose wisdom had guided civilization through numerous crises. Fellow beings of the Confederation, his voice carried easily through the chamber's acoustic enhancement systems. We gather today to address a matter of potentially profound significance for our galactic community. Commander Hexara of the Veltar hegemony has presented information regarding the human species that requires our immediate attention. Zyaxthara felt her hearts racing as Chancellor Vector gestured for her to approach the primary speaking position. Around the chamber, she could see representatives leaning forward with interest, their various forms of body language suggesting curiosity, concern, and, in some cases, skepticism. Commander, the Chancellor's tone was formal, but not unkind. Please present your findings to the Assembly. Zyaxthara activated the presentation system she had prepared, and holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber, showing each representative the same data she had compiled over the past months. Industrial output charts, technological analysis reports, and energy consumption patterns that painted a picture of human development that defied every established model. Honored representatives, she began, her voice steadying as she fell into the familiar rhythm of military briefing protocol. For the past 6 months, I have been conducting standard monitoring operations of human colonial development. What I have discovered challenges fundamental assumptions about technological progression and the nature of emerging civilizations. The first set of displays showed the comparative development rates between humans and other species at similar stages of galactic integration. The numbers were stark, showing human achievements that exceeded established baselines by factors that should have been impossible. According to our models, the level of development shown by human colonies should require technological assistance and resource allocation far beyond what has been provided. Yet our monitoring shows that humans have achieved these results independently, using methods that our scientists cannot fully explain. Ambassador Threek of the Corvani Federation, a species known for their analytical approach to problem-solving, raised a crystalline appendage to request recognition. Commander, are you suggesting that our monitoring systems have been inadequate? The Confederation has successfully guided over 200 species through the integration process. Our methods are proven and reliable. ZYXTRA had anticipated this question. Ambassador, I'm suggesting that humanity represents a development pattern that falls outside our established parameters. The monitoring systems have functioned correctly. The issue is that what they're observing doesn't match our theoretical models. She activated the next series of displays, showing the quantum signatures and energy readings that had first drawn her attention. The mathematical anomalies were clear even to non-specialists, representing technology that operated on principles the Confederation hadn't fully mastered. 3 days ago, I was contacted by representatives of something called the Human Exploratory Cooperative. They provided information that explains these anomalies, but the explanation raises questions about our fundamental understanding of technological development. A wave of murmurs rippled through the chamber. Representatives began activating their own analysis systems, running independent calculations on the data ZYXTRA had presented. She could see expressions of surprise, confusion, and growing concern as the implications became clear. Chancellor Vector raised a hand for silence. Commander, what specific information did these human representatives provide? This was the moment ZYXTRA had been dreading. How could she explain consciousness-based reality manipulation to an assembly that had spent millennia building civilization on materialist scientific principles? They claim to have discovered that consciousness plays a direct role in shaping physical reality at the quantum level. Using this discovery, they have developed technologies that transcend the limitations we have accepted as universal constants. The silence that followed was deafening. For several long moments, the vast chamber was filled only with the soft hum of life support systems and the distant sound of data processors working to analyze the information ZYXTRA had provided. Finally, Science Director Quellen of the Academic Consortium spoke. The elderly Savari's voice carried the weight of 5 centuries spent studying the fundamental forces of the universe. Commander, what you're describing contradicts the basic principles of physics that have governed our understanding for thousands of years. Are you certain that these humans haven't simply developed advanced technology that creates the illusion of reality manipulation? ZYXTRA had hoped to avoid this moment, but she realized that the assembly needed to see the full scope of what humanity had achieved. She activated a recording she had made of Captain Chen's demonstration, showing the mathematical frameworks and visual evidence of human capabilities. The reaction was immediate and intense. Representatives throughout the chamber began speaking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of concern, disbelief, and analysis. Some demanded independent verification of the data, others called for immediate contact with human leadership, and more than a few suggested that the human claims were elaborate deception. Order! Chancellor Vector's voice cut through the noise with the authority of centuries of diplomatic experience. We will address this matter systematically and rationally. Science Director Quellen, can your department conduct independent analysis of Commander ZYXTRA's findings? We can and will, Quellen replied, though his expression suggested deep skepticism. However, I must state for the record that the claims being made run counter to everything we understand about the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. If such manipulation were possible, we would expect to see evidence of it in other species as well. Ambassador Threek activated his speaking privilege again. More importantly, if humans possess capabilities of this magnitude, why have they not used them to establish dominance? The pattern of galactic history suggests that superior technological capability inevitably leads to expansion and conquest. ZYXTRA found herself remembering Captain Chen's words about strength and control. Ambassador, according to the human representative I spoke with, their understanding of their capabilities has led them to a different conception of power. They apparently believe that true strength comes from helping others grow rather than dominating them. The skeptical laughter that followed from several representatives made ZYXTRA's scales bristle with irritation. She had spent months observing human behavior, and while she didn't fully understand their motivations, she had seen enough evidence to know that their approach to power was genuinely different from established galactic norms. Representatives, she continued, her voice taking on a harder edge, I have observed human colonies for 6 months. I have seen them share technology freely with less advanced species, provide assistance without demanding tribute, and consistently choose cooperation over conflict even when they possess superior capabilities. This is not the behavior pattern of a species planning conquest. Defense Coordinator Kess of the Military Council leaned forward, his augmented form crackling with the energy fields that kept his cybernetic components functional. Commander, assuming for a moment that these human claims are accurate, what are the implications for galactic security? A species with reality manipulation capabilities could represent an existential threat to every other form of life in the galaxy. The question hung in the air like a physical weight. ZYXR realized that this was the core issue the Assembly would have to address. How could galactic civilization adapt to the existence of a species whose capabilities transcended known limitations? Coordinator, I believe that depends entirely on how the Confederation chooses to respond to this information. The humans have been deliberately limiting their expansion and hiding their capabilities to avoid exactly this kind of concern. They appear to want peaceful coexistence, not domination. But can we trust that desire to continue indefinitely? The question came from Ambassador Yeth of the peripheral colonies, whose species had experienced subjugation by more advanced civilizations in the past. Power corrupts, Commander. It's one of the few universal constants we've observed across all sentient species. ZYXR found herself in the uncomfortable position of defending a species she was still struggling to understand. Ambassador, perhaps that's because we've never encountered a species that understands power the way humans apparently do. They seem to view their capabilities as a responsibility to help others grow, not as tools for domination. Science Director Quellen had been running calculations throughout the discussion, and now his expression showed a mixture of fascination and deep concern. Commander, if even half of what you've described is accurate, we may be facing a fundamental paradigm shift in our understanding of reality itself. The implications extend far beyond questions of galactic security. He activated a display showing theoretical models of consciousness-matter interaction. If consciousness can directly influence physical reality, then every assumption we've made about the nature of the universe may require revision. This isn't just a technological advancement. It's a revolution in our understanding of existence itself. Chancellor Vektar had been listening to the discussion with the careful attention of someone who had navigated countless diplomatic crises. Now he spoke with the gravity that the situation demanded. It appears that the Confederation faces a choice that will define our future. We can treat this human development as a threat to be contained, potentially forcing a conflict with a species whose capabilities we don't fully understand. Or we can recognize it as an opportunity for growth that could benefit the entire galaxy. He paused, looking around the chamber at the faces of representatives who had never expected to confront questions of this magnitude. The question before us is not merely political or military. It's philosophical. Are we prepared to accept that our understanding of reality may have been incomplete? Are we willing to learn from a species that appears to have transcended limitations we thought were absolute? Ambassador Threek's crystalline form reflected the chamber's lights as he spoke. Chancellor, with respect, those are questions for philosophers and scientists. As political leaders, we must address practical concerns. If humans possess the capabilities that have been described, how do we ensure that galactic stability is maintained? Perhaps, Vwaixthara said quietly, we need to redefine what we mean by stability. The words drew immediate attention from across the chamber. She realized that she was about to voice the question that had been forming in her mind for months, the question that could reshape everything. For 3,000 years, the Confederation has maintained stability through balance, through ensuring that no single species becomes dominant. But what if the universe is offering us a different kind of stability? What if true stability comes not from limiting growth, but from embracing it? She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from across the galaxy. The humans aren't asking us to submit to their authority. They're offering to share knowledge that could transcend the limitations that have constrained all of us. The question isn't whether we can trust them with power. The question is whether we are brave enough to grow beyond the fears that have defined our civilization. The silence that followed was different from the earlier shock. This was the silence of minds grappling with possibilities they had never imagined, of leaders confronting a choice that could determine the destiny of every species in the galaxy. Chancellor Vectar's voice broke the silence. Commander Zwyxtra, you have given us much to consider. This assembly will need time to fully evaluate the implications of what you've presented. He looked around the chamber with the weight of 3 millennia of galactic history behind his words. But I believe we can all agree that the choice before us will require wisdom beyond anything our civilization has previously demonstrated. We are being asked to trust not just in human intentions, but in possibilities that challenge the very foundations of our understanding. As the session bell chimed to signal a recess, Zwyxtra realized that the galaxy had reached a turning point that would define the future of every sentient being in known space. The question was whether that future would be shaped by fear or by the courage to embrace growth beyond imagined limitations. The emergency session of the Confederation Science Council convened in the secure research facility orbiting Axiom Prime, the Confederation's most advanced scientific installation. For 48 hours, the galaxy's greatest minds had been working around the clock to verify the claims that Commander Zwyxtra had presented to the Assembly. The results of their analysis would determine whether humanity would be welcomed as a partner or contained as a threat. Science Director Quellen stood before a massive holographic display showing the quantum signatures that human technology produced, his aged features reflecting the exhaustion of someone who had spent 2 days challenging every assumption he had held about the nature of reality. Around him, representatives from 12 different scientific disciplines sat in stunned silence as they processed data that defied 3 millennia of established knowledge. Colleagues, Quellen began, his voice carrying the weight of conclusions that he clearly wished he didn't have to deliver. I have spent the last 48 hours hoping to find flaws in Commander Zwyxtra's analysis, some explanation that would allow us to maintain our current understanding of physical law. I have been unsuccessful. He gestured to the display, which showed energy patterns that violated conservation principles in ways that should have been impossible. The quantum signatures we've detected from human technology are real. The energy outputs exceed input by factors that our physics cannot explain. Most significantly, the temporal displacement effects suggest manipulation of space-time at a level that requires capabilities we have believed to be purely theoretical. Dr. Shun Corvain, the Confederation's leading expert on quantum mechanics, leaned forward in her specialized aquatic environment suit. As a member of the aquatic Delphini species, her perspectives on energy flow had always been considered radical by galactic scientific standards. Now those perspectives seemed prophetic. Director, have you been able to determine the mechanism by which humans achieve these effects? Quellen activated a new display showing the mathematical frameworks that Captain Chun had demonstrated. This is where our analysis becomes truly disturbing from the perspective of established science. The humans appear to have developed a unified field theory that incorporates consciousness as a fundamental force rather than an emergent property of complex matter arrangements. The implications of those words rippled through the assembled scientists like a physical shock. For millennia, galactic science had been built on the assumption that consciousness was a byproduct of sufficiently advanced neural networks, essentially sophisticated information processing systems that arose from complex matter but remained separate from the fundamental forces that governed reality. If their theory is correct, Quellen continued, then consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it participates in creating it at the quantum level. The act of conscious observation doesn't simply collapse quantum probability waves. It influences the nature of those probabilities in ways that allow directed manipulation of physical law. Dr. Xanthal, a Savari theoretical physicist whose work had pushed the boundaries of Confederation understanding for centuries, spoke with the careful precision of someone whose entire worldview was crumbling in real time. Director, you're describing a form of directed reality manipulation that would make every conscious being in the galaxy a potential force of nature. The philosophical and practical implications are staggering. Indeed they are, Quellen replied grimly. But the evidence is undeniable. We've conducted independent verification of the human quantum signatures using our most advanced sensors. We've analyzed the mathematical frameworks they've provided and found them to be internally consistent and predictively accurate. Most importantly, we've observed the results of their technology in operation, and those results demonstrate capabilities that can only be explained by the theories they've presented. He paused, looking around at faces that reflected the same mixture of fascination and terror he was feeling. Colleagues, we are forced to conclude that humanity has developed an understanding of consciousness-reality interaction that transcends every model we have ever created. The question now is what we do with that conclusion. Dr. Corvain's bioluminescent patterns flickered with the rapid thinking patterns her species exhibited under stress. Director, have you considered the possibility that this represents an evolutionary leap rather than a technological one? Perhaps human consciousness operates differently at a fundamental level than other known forms of sentience. The suggestion sent a chill through the assembly. If humans possessed inherently different consciousness capabilities, it meant that the techniques they had developed might not be transferable to other species. It could also mean that humanity represented a new form of life that operated by rules the galaxy had never encountered. We've considered that possibility, Quellen admitted. Our xenobiological analysis suggests that human neural structures do show some unusual characteristics, particularly in their capacity for what they call intuitive leaps in reasoning. However, our preliminary analysis indicates that the consciousness-matter interaction they've discovered appears to be a universal principle rather than a uniquely human capability. Dr. Xanthel's expression showed the kind of excitement that scientists experienced when confronting paradigm-shifting discoveries. You're suggesting that all conscious beings possess these capabilities? That we've simply never learned to access them? That appears to be the case. The human research indicates that consciousness-reality interaction is constrained by beliefs about what's possible rather than by actual physical limitations. Most species develop scientific frameworks that define the boundaries of possibility, and those frameworks then become self-reinforcing limitations on what consciousness can achieve. The chamber fell silent as the assembled scientists grappled with the implications. If Quellen was correct, it meant that every species in the galaxy had been unconsciously limiting their own potential for thousands of years, creating technological and scientific constraints that existed only because they believed those constraints were real. The humans appear to have bypassed these limitations by approaching consciousness and reality from a completely different philosophical foundation, Quellen continued. Instead of viewing consciousness as separate from physical reality, they've developed an understanding that treats consciousness as an integral part of the quantum field that underlies all existence. Dr. Corvain's patterns were now cycling through colors that indicated deep contemplation. Director, if this understanding can be taught to other species, we're looking at the potential for a transformation of galactic civilization that exceeds anything in recorded history. Yes, Quellen replied, but we're also looking at the potential for disruption that could destabilize everything the Confederation has built. If every species suddenly gained access to reality manipulation capabilities, what happens to the political and economic structures that maintain galactic order? Before anyone could respond, an emergency communication signal began broadcasting throughout the facility. The holographic image of Chancellor Vector materialized in the center of the chamber, his expression showing the strain of someone who had been making critical decisions without adequate rest. Science Council, I need your immediate analysis. We've just received a communication from the human delegation that changes the nature of our situation significantly. The Chancellor gestured, and a new holographic display appeared showing a star chart of the galaxy with unprecedented detail. But this wasn't a normal stellar cartography display. The stars themselves seemed to pulse with energy patterns that shifted and flowed like living organisms. 30 minutes ago, human representatives transmitted this image to Confederation headquarters. They claim it shows the galaxy as it actually exists, rather than as our instruments have been able to detect it. Dr. Xanthel studied the display with the intensity of someone whose life's work had suddenly taken on cosmic significance. Chancellor, what are we looking at? According to the humans, we're seeing the consciousness field that underlies galactic structure. They claim that every star system, every planet, every form of life exists within a vast network of conscious energy that connects all existence at the quantum level. The implications hit the assembled scientists like a physical force. If the humans were showing them an accurate representation of reality, it meant that the galaxy itself was a form of vast, interconnected consciousness. Every decision made by every sentient being affected the fundamental structure of existence itself. More importantly, the Chancellor continued, they claim that this consciousness field is currently in a state of transition. Something is happening at the galactic level that will fundamentally alter the nature of reality for every form of life in known space. Science Director Quellen felt his understanding of the situation shift again. Chancellor, are you suggesting that the human development of consciousness reality manipulation is connected to some kind of larger galactic event? That's exactly what I'm suggesting. The humans claim that their discovery of consciousness-matter interaction wasn't an isolated scientific breakthrough. They believe it's part of a natural evolutionary process that affects entire galactic regions, and that process is accelerating. The Chancellor's expression grew more grave. They've also informed us that other species throughout the galaxy are beginning to show signs of similar developments, whether they realize it or not. The humans were simply the first to understand what was happening and develop systematic methods for working with it. Dr. Corvain's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to colors that indicated both excitement and alarm. Chancellor, what kind of timeline are we looking at for these changes? According to human projections, the transition process will become undeniable within the next few months. Species throughout the galaxy will begin experiencing consciousness-reality interaction events, whether they understand them or not. The only question is whether those species will be prepared to handle the experience constructively. The chamber erupted in voices as scientists began calculating the implications of galactic-scale consciousness evolution. The concerns about human capabilities suddenly seemed trivial compared to the prospect of every species in the galaxy spontaneously developing reality manipulation abilities without understanding or preparation. Order, Quellen called, his voice cutting through the chaos. Chancellor, what are the humans proposing? They're offering to share their understanding of consciousness-reality interaction with any species willing to learn. They claim that proper education and preparation can make the transition smooth and beneficial, while attempting to suppress or ignore it could lead to chaotic and potentially destructive outcomes. The Chancellor paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of a decision that could determine the fate of galactic civilization. The Confederation Council is meeting in emergency session to decide whether to accept human assistance in preparing for this transition or to attempt to maintain current conditions through suppression of consciousness development research. Dr. Xanthal spoke into the silence that followed. Chancellor, from a scientific perspective, attempting to suppress a natural evolutionary process would be like trying to prevent stellar formation by banning nuclear physics. If the humans are correct about the scope of what's happening, resistance will only make the process more chaotic. That's our assessment as well, the Chancellor replied. But the political implications are staggering. We're being asked to trust a species we've known for less than 50 years with guidance through a transformation that could reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. Science Director Quellen looked around at his colleagues, seeing his own mixture of fear and wonder reflected in their faces. The question before them wasn't just scientific or political. It was ultimately about whether the galaxy was ready to embrace possibilities that transcended everything they had believed about the nature of existence. Chancellor, he said finally, I believe we need to ask a more fundamental question. If the humans are offering partnership in growth rather than domination through superior capability, what do we have to lose by accepting their guidance? And what do we risk by refusing it? The question hung in the air as the galaxy's greatest scientific minds contemplated a choice that could determine whether consciousness evolution would be a gift or a catastrophe for every form of life in known space. The answer would depend on whether the Confederation had the courage to trust in possibilities beyond their current understanding, or whether fear would lead them to resist a transformation that might be as inevitable as the movement of the stars themselves. 6 months after the emergency sessions that had shaken the foundations of galactic civilization, Commander Xayakthara stood once again in the observation deck of Research Station Omega-7. But the view that greeted her was unlike anything she could have imagined when this journey began. New Geneva had transformed into something that transcended the categories of planet, city, or space station. The surface glowed with patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with activities taking place simultaneously across multiple star systems. Structures that seemed to be grown from crystallized thought reached toward the stars, while streams of pure energy carried materials, information, and consciousness between worlds that had learned to exist as a single, integrated organism. But most remarkable of all were the ships. Vessels from across the Confederation moved through space around New Geneva using methods that had nothing to do with conventional propulsion. Safari exploration craft that danced through hyperspace like living things. Thurian research vessels that folded space around themselves with the casual elegance of origami masters. Even her own people, the Veltar, had begun developing technologies that operated on principles of consciousness-matter interaction that would have been considered impossible just months before. The galaxy was learning, and it was changing everything. It's beautiful, isn't it? Captain Sarah Chen's voice carried the same warmth Zwayaxthara remembered from their first meeting, but there was something more in it now. A depth that spoke of experiences that transcended normal human development. When we first discovered what consciousness could do, we thought we were the only ones. It took us a while to realize that we were just the first to remember. Zwayaxthara turned to face the human woman who had become one of the most important figures in galactic history. Over the past months, Chen had traveled between worlds throughout Confederation space, working with scientists, philosophers, and ordinary beings who were beginning to experience the reality-shifting effects of expanded consciousness. Remember? Chun smiled with the expression of someone sharing a secret that wasn't really secret anymore. Commander, what we call consciousness evolution isn't new. Our research indicates that all species possess these capabilities in their early development. The ability to directly influence reality through focused intention is as natural as breathing for conscious beings. She gestured toward the transformed landscape of New Geneva. The reason galactic civilization never discovered this is because the process of technological and social development gradually taught species to limit their consciousness to narrow, specialized functions. We learned to think of ourselves as separate from the universe we observed, and that separation became a self-imposed limitation on what we could achieve. Zwayaxthara had heard variations of this explanation dozens of times over the past months, but she was still struggling to fully accept its implications. The idea that her entire species had been unconsciously constraining their own potential for millions of years was both liberating and terrifying. How many species are participating now? Over 200, with more requesting integration assistance every week, Chen replied. The Safari have made remarkable progress in consciousness-based space navigation. The Thurian Diplomatic Corps has begun using reality consensus techniques to resolve conflicts that have existed for centuries. Even some of the more conservative species are starting to experiment with limited consciousness expansion. Through the observation deck's enhanced viewing system, Zwayaxthara could see a perfect example of what Shan was describing. A massive construction project was taking place in the asteroid belt, but instead of using conventional mining and manufacturing techniques, multiple species were working together to literally think raw materials into the shapes and configurations they needed. Corvani engineers provided mathematical frameworks, while Delphini consciousness specialists guided energy flow patterns. Thurian architects contributed aesthetic sensibilities that helped stabilize the quantum fields, while human coordinators maintained the overall unity of purpose that kept the entire project coherent. The result was a space habitat that existed as much in pure thought as it did in physical matter, capable of adapting its structure and function based on the needs of its inhabitants in real time. The Confederation Council has officially adopted the Consciousness Cooperation Protocols, Zwayaxthara said, watching a transport vessel that moved by harmonizing its quantum signature with the destination it desired to reach. But there are still holdout species that refuse to acknowledge what's happening. Chen's expression grew more serious. We expected that. Consciousness evolution represents such a fundamental change in how beings understand themselves and their relationship to reality that some species will need time to adjust. The important thing is that we're not forcing anyone to participate. She turned to look directly at Zwayaxthara, and in her eyes was the question that had been building throughout their months of interaction. Commander, there's something I need to ask you. something that goes beyond political cooperation or scientific exchange. ZYX felt her secondary hearts begin to race. Over the past months, she had come to recognize the particular tone Shin used when she was about to reveal information that would challenge existing assumptions. But this felt different, more personal somehow. "What is it, Captain?" Shin was quiet for several moments, seeming to choose her words with unusual care. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that suggested the question she was about to ask had implications that extended far beyond their individual conversation. "Commander, I need you to think about something that might seem strange. In all your observations of human development, in all the time you've spent trying to understand what makes our species different, have you ever considered that the question itself might be wrong?" ZYX blinked, her mind racing to understand what Chun was suggesting. "I'm not sure I follow. You've been trying to understand what makes humans special, what capabilities we possess that other species don't. But what if the real question is different? What if the question is, what makes you think you're not human?" The words hit ZYX like a physical shock. For a moment, she couldn't process what Chun was suggesting. The idea was so far outside her conceptual framework that her mind seemed to simply refuse to engage with it. "Captain, I'm Veltor. We evolved on Velthek Prime over millions of years. Our biology, our psychology, our entire evolutionary history is completely different from humanity." Shin nodded patiently. "Yes, your forms are different. Your cultural development followed different paths. Your technologies evolve along different lines. But, Commander, what if those differences are less significant than you've been taught to believe?" She activated a holographic display that showed consciousness field patterns from across the galaxy. The energy signatures were complex beyond description, but as ZYX studied them, she began to see patterns that made her breathing accelerate. "This is a map of consciousness resonance patterns from different species," Chen explained. "What you're seeing is the fundamental frequency at which different forms of awareness interact with reality at the quantum level." The display zoomed in on specific patterns, highlighting similarities that seemed impossible. Veltar consciousness signatures showed harmonic relationships with human patterns that suggested deep underlying connections. Savari awareness frequencies resonated with Thurian thought processes in ways that implied shared foundational structures. "Captain, what are you showing me?" "I'm showing you that consciousness itself doesn't recognize the boundaries that we've created between species. At the fundamental level, all awareness operates according to the same principles, creates reality through the same mechanisms, and participates in the same universal field of existence." Chen's voice grew softer, more intimate. "Commander, the reason humans were able to develop consciousness-reality interaction so quickly isn't because we're fundamentally different from other species. It's because we approach the question from a different angle. Instead of asking, how can we manipulate reality? We asked, how can we remember what reality actually is?" She paused, and when she continued, ZYX heard something in her voice that made her realize this conversation was more important than anything they had discussed before. "And what we remembered is that consciousness isn't something that emerges from matter. Matter is something that emerges from consciousness. Every being in the galaxy, regardless of their physical form or evolutionary history, is consciousness experiencing itself through temporarily focused awareness." The implications crashed over ZYX like a wave. If Chun was right, it meant that the fundamental categories that divided the galaxy into separate species were illusions created by limited perspective. It meant that every being in known space was part of a single, vast consciousness that had chosen to experience itself through countless different forms. "You're saying that species distinctions are temporary focusing mechanisms that consciousness uses to explore different aspects of existence," Chen finished. "Real and meaningful for the purposes of growth and experience, but not fundamental barriers that separate us from each other." ZYX found herself staring at her own reflection in the observation deck's viewing screen. Her scaled skin, her 4 arms, her physical form that marked her as definitively non-human, suddenly seemed less like barriers to connection and more like interesting variations on a common theme. But if that's true, then why hasn't the galaxy discovered this before? Why did it take humans to remember what consciousness actually is? Chen's smile was gentle and sad. Because remembering requires letting go of the belief that you're separate from everything else. And most species develop identity structures that depend on that separation. They learn to think of themselves as isolated consciousnesses observing an external universe, rather than as aspects of a universal consciousness exploring its own infinite potential. She gestured toward the transformed space around New Geneva. Humans weren't smarter or more advanced. We just happened to approach the question of consciousness from a philosophical framework that didn't assume separation as a starting point. And once we made that shift, everything else became possible. Zawayakthara felt something fundamental shifting in her understanding of herself and her place in the universe. For months, she had been trying to understand what made humans special. Now, she was being asked to consider that the specialness might not belong to any particular species, but to consciousness itself. Captain, if what you're telling me is true, then the question I've been carrying for months, the question about what makes humans different, is the wrong question, Chun confirmed gently. The right question, the one that changes everything, is much simpler and much more profound. Zawayakthara looked at Chun, then out at the transformed galaxy where species that had considered themselves fundamentally separate were learning to work together as aspects of a single, evolving consciousness. She thought about the fear and wonder she had experienced over the past months, the challenge to everything she had believed about reality and identity. And finally, she found the courage to ask the question that had been forming in the depths of her being since the moment this journey began. Who are we, really? Chen's smile was radiant. We're consciousness itself, awakening to its own infinite nature through every form of awareness that has ever existed. We're the universe experiencing its own potential for growth, connection, and creative expression. And we're at the very beginning of remembering what that means. As Zawayakthara looked out at the galaxy that was transforming around them, she realized that the question she had just asked wasn't just changing her understanding of human nature. It was changing her understanding of her own nature and the nature of every conscious being in existence. The galaxy wasn't just learning new technology or developing new capabilities. It was awakening to the truth of what it had always been, and that awakening was the most beautiful and terrifying thing she had ever witnessed. In the end, the question that changed everything wasn't about humans at all. It was about consciousness itself and the infinite potential that had been waiting for species throughout the galaxy to remember who they really were. The transformation was just beginning.